Resume my recording. There we go. Okay. So we've muted you. So if you need to make any responses, just do it in the chat box for now. And make sure that you have your video turned off. And we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome. And let's see here. There we go. This is actually the second installment of the Discover Wellness While at Home webinar series, and it's been hosted by the University of Illinois Extension. This particular webinar today is on caregiver self-care, and actually our focus is going to be on caregivers of older adults, but much of this information that we go over could be relevant for caregivers of all ages. Speaking is, I'm Sherry Burcham, and I'm a family life educator with the U of I Extension, and I cover 5 counties, Coles, Cumberland, Moultrie, Douglas, and Shelby. And Tessa, you want to introduce yourself and where you're from?
Sure. I'm a family life educator as well. I cover Knox, Henderson, Warren, and Madonna counties.
Okay, great. And we're just really glad to have you all here today joining us. A little bit about us. University of Illinois Extension is the outreach, basically the arm of the university, bringing research-based materials out to the communities and in a way that you can use them, in a practical way that you can use them. And family life educators are just part of the U of I Extension. There are 5 of us, and on the map you can see the areas that we cover. If we're not covering your area, that's okay. That doesn't mean that you can't also get the information. Like today, you're on the webinar getting our information. We basically will cover the entire state as needed, but we wanted to show you where we're all located at. Okay, so I want to read this ad to you. This is a help wanted ad, and it says, energetic person to provide constant companionship to someone who is unable to care for self. Position includes all cooking, house cleaning, yard work, and personal care. Must be responsible, creative, alert 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Experience in dealing with Social Security, Medicare, insurance, and other agencies, a plus. Heavy lifting required, no vacations, no holidays, no pay. Call. So, how many people do you think would be waiting in line for this job? Well, it doesn't sound like many people would probably want that job, yet there's millions of people who are doing this right now. This ad, of course, you've guessed, would be for, a caregiver. And most take this job without applying for it. And some caregivers don't even have time to prepare for it, while others, they may not even recognize that they're already doing the job until they're well into it. Meaning they might start out by helping someone with the chores around the house, and then they might start running some errands for them and doing some yard work, and then they're writing checks for them. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh wait, I'm actually being their caregiver. Okay. So caregivers perform many tasks, and that can provide, they can do tangible care as well as emotional. Some caregivers are doing tasks like, bathing, cooking, handling financial business, but they're also, along with that, providing the emotional support for that care receiver by listening to them and encouraging and comforting. They can also assist in problem solving when they help make those caregiving decisions. Now, the majority of caregivers are informal or not paid, and they usually are family members. About 86% are. There are also, of course, formal or paid caregivers. Some of you on here might even be those that assist in a home setting or in long-term care. The information we provide today can be considered from different angles, whether you are the personal caregiver yourself, or you're a professional who helps families that deal with caregiving responsibilities, or even that professional caregiving position, that you're helping someone in their home or facility. So all this information should be helpful regardless of what role you play. So these are kind of the objectives that we're going to shoot for today. We're going to talk a lot about the challenges and burdens and losses that can occur in caregiving for the caregiver. We're going to talk about those difficult emotions that many of them experience, and talk about caregiver stress and techniques for self-care so that we can help prevent caregiver burnout. And again, although the focus is on caregivers of older adults, the information given today can be relevant to caregivers of all ages, even children, because we're going to talk about, stress and self-care and difficult emotions, and all of that will apply. So, who are these caregivers? These the people that are doing the role in the ad that I read. So, someone that's caregiving a lot of times feels like they're all alone, but they're actually joined, there's by 34.2 million informal caregivers of adults age 55 plus. So we find a lot of statistics about informal caregivers, but we're not able to find so much about the more formal or paid caregivers. So a lot of this information is for non-paid. Of the informal caregivers, most of those are women, about 60%. So men are starting to close the gap as we go. Most of them are employed, and they're a lot of times working an average of over 34 hours a week, so almost full time as well. Most of them tend to be like the average age is around 50. And they provide an average of 24.1 hours per week of care, although 22% of caregivers provide over 41 hours a week. So a lot of this information was all, it all came from the National Alliance for Caregiving and AARP. And one thing is for sure, most of these caregivers, they've had no official training. A lot of times, unless you're with a company that's has paid or formal caregivers, there's no classes out there a lot of times for them. And like I said, they sometimes find themselves just in the job before they realize it. But for sure, not many, not only are many of them working, but caregivers are also very busy. They're caring for their own kids sometimes, or their grandkids, and they have other responsibilities. So again, most of them have no training, and they're very busy people. And because of this busyness, because there's, have so many things going on in their lives, caregivers tend to pay very little attention to themselves. Many times they ignore their own physical and emotional needs, such as not getting enough sleep, nutritious meals, exercising, or having enough alone time. They don't get a chance to visit very often with friends or share the emotions that they're having with others. And many times they don't seek preventive health care for themselves, like getting checkups or screenings, things like that. And that can have an accumulative effect on their health. So much so that research shows an estimated 17% of family caregivers view their health as fair to poor. And 1 in 5 caregivers report their health has become worse since they've begun caregiving. So a note about those that care for people with dementia. There are about 15.9 million caregivers of those who suffer from Alzheimer's or other dementias. And these caregivers can experience a lot more challenges than others. So it's no surprise to see that 30 to 40% of dementia caregivers have depression, um, and more than 33% of dementia caregivers indicated that their health had gotten worse since taking over their caregiver duties. So much higher than the others. So we kind of liken caregiving to riding a roller coaster, you know, the ups and the downs. And instead of ups and downs, we look at the opportunities and the burdens. And we have quite a few of you on today. It looks like, around 200 of you today. So I'm not going to ask this outright, but just be thinking as I ask you this. Think of some of the opportunities or rewards that you would find in providing care for somebody. And then think about some of the burdens or the challenges that caregivers face. And many times when you're asked, you know, is it easier to list the rewards or the burdens? You know, we will hear from people, you know, oh, the burdens just were right on, you know, right on the tip. They could list those very quickly. So we're going to talk about the burdens first, okay? I always like to save the positive stuff for the end. So we're going to talk about some of the burdens or the challenges that caregivers face. And so, and these are a list of commonly reported. There's probably many additional ones, and there may be some on here that caregivers don't relate with, some don't relate with, and that's totally natural, but these are very common ones. The first one there is the relationship and role changes that can happen. If you're an adult child caring for your parents, sometimes you may feel that there's been a role reversal with the parents. So it's almost like you're the parent instead of the child. Spouses also will feel this too. When they're caring for their spouse, they may feel a role reversal with the tasks that they take on. Like the husband, he may be starting to do household tasks that his wife always did in the past. So, you know, and vice versa. So sometimes you see a role reversal that way. Another challenge is that if the caregiver and the care receiver have had a negative relationship, and maybe they never really got along, and now here they're kind of forced, you know, to work together, and that resentment may still be there by both parties, both or one of the parties. Along those lines, there also may be unresolved issues that happened in the past that maybe you kind of buried them until the caregiving began, and now they're kind of coming to the surface again, and you're revisiting those unresolved issues. Another thing is losses. Losses is a big one. Caregivers will report that many losses occur during the caregiving experience, and some of those can include maybe their job or in the money that results from that job loss. Sometimes they feel like they've lost their home, or at least the privacy of their home if a care receiver moves in with them, or vice versa. Caregivers also feel like they lose their relationships with their friends and coworkers because they don't have time to spend with them. We already talked about that they will have sometimes a loss in their health and well-being because they're so busy with their caregiving duties and trying to, you know, keep all the balls in the air, doing everything. Also, they can feel like they might be losing control of their lives, losing the freedom to do what they would like to do. And sometimes their very identity, because they may no longer be like the parent or the spouse or the worker. It's now they're just the caregiver. So sometimes they feel like they get lost in that identity. Another challenge is if the care receiver is exhibiting difficult behavior, and that can happen a lot with dementia patients, or maybe their personality is just very challenging. Um, Family members may not, they may disagree with how someone provides care or the decisions that are made, or they may just not provide any assistance at all. So you may have, I see this with siblings a lot. It will come up whenever they're trying to care for their parents, and it will come up where, maybe one sibling is doing most of the caregiving duties and the others don't chip in, or they do just enough to criticize and not help the way they need to. So that can be definitely an issue and a burden. Other challenges can include communicating with healthcare and social service professionals, but also the unmet personal needs, because they just don't have time to do anything, and eventually the fatigue is going to set in if these burdens are not addressed. Okay. And if you are a formal caregiver, someone that's paid and you're on, we also mention some things that apply to you as well. Paid caregivers that work in a home setting or long-term care setting can experience many of the burdens I just mentioned, but they can also have additional issues that they have to deal with. Some may work with unappreciative care receivers or the family of the care receiver. They may be demanding and never express gratitude for the service. Or they may have a care receiver that's uncooperative, whether it's Alzheimer's or other dementias, or maybe just they're in denial. They don't think they need help. And I'm sure you can relate to that they don't feel like they're ready for help, and they're just making it harder for you to step in. Families of the care receiver sometimes also need a lot of emotional support, and maybe it ends up that you're the one, the caregiver is the one that they look to for that, and that can be additionally draining for the caregiver. If you're not only trying to do all the tasks and manage everything, but you have family members there that are really leaning on you for extra support. Then there's extra things that informal caregivers wouldn't have to worry so much. There's workplace related challenges like dealing with inexperienced coworkers or understaffed schedules. And, when someone goes in as a paid caregiver, they may have unmet expectations about the job. They may have thought it would be something that it ends up not being. Okay, they may have had these high expectations of what they had hoped for, and it may just be too challenging or not what they thought they were getting into. So Tessa's going to talk about caregiver stress and burnout.
So again, as we look, and probably pretty obvious, the weight of these burdens and challenges, plus the inability to get difficult emotions in check, definitely contribute to the increasing levels of stress and could lead to burnout. And burnout is a syndrome of mental, emotional, and physical depletion. Burnout interferes with a caregiver's ability to function and is actually a leading cause of nursing home placement for care receivers. And so, again, as we think about that, and I think maybe all of us can think of a time or know somebody who had good intentions of caring for someone for a while, but because of burnout, it led them to the nursing home placement. So again, as we move forward with stress and caregivers, when asked, caregivers will say they are doing okay, but they actually suffer from higher stress than their cohorts. About 38% of caregivers report their situation is highly stressful. And even higher levels of stress are reported when the care receiver is a close relative, like a spouse, about 42%, or a parent, 44%. If care receivers suffer from a chronic or a long-term condition like Alzheimer's, um, or a long-term physical condition, caregivers will also find themselves highly stressed if they felt they had a lack of choice in regards to becoming the caregiver. So again, that truly makes sense. So we've been talking a lot about stress and choices and that connection. And if they are living with the care receiver and providing a high number of hours of care, then obviously their stress increases as well. So, kind of moving on to the warning signs of stress. First, I like to take a look at some of the typical warning signs of stress. So, feelings of tension, such as tight muscles or headaches or body aches. Um, and and again, kind of think about a time where you feel stressed, maybe now, and think about, do that whole body check and where you're feeling the most stress or tension. Also, mentally and physically tired and fatigued. So many times I'll talk to somebody, they're like, I really shouldn't feel this tired, but I'm exhausted. I'm just mentally exhausted. Chronic physical ailments, digestive issues. I was just talking to someone earlier today, and they said, I just had kind of this little pit in my stomach. So, again, digestive issues, colds, immune system is affected, and they are more susceptible to illness. Earlier, we kind of already talked about depression and anxiety, symptoms associated with no appetite or overeating, insomnia, sleeping often, and again, apathy or irritability, thoughts of intent such as he is trying to annoy me or she knows how to do that. So many times when we think about somebody with a chronic illness or dementia or Alzheimer's, one day it might be really good and the next day, their memory is not functioning. And so sometimes people kind of get in the mindset of, she knows that's something that annoys me, or she is just being stubborn. Again, sometimes the stressful situation can become abusive. And again, when we look at some of the figures, 4 out of 5 abusers of older people are family members. So again, we really do need to be in touch of burnout and how we're feeling and being able to kind of control those emotions. And again, many cases are not reported. So eh, again, acknowledging how you're feeling and being able to talk to somebody about that. So again, when we look at to prevent and manage caregiver stress with self-care, and that's kind of a common theme right now about self-care. Again, to prevent and manage this stress of caregiving, caregivers should practice several elements of self-care. So caregivers should practice relaxation and rejuvenation techniques that work for them. And the key word is that work for them. Everybody knows and has a different approach to things, but here's this might be something like deep breathing, guided imagery, visualization, yoga, art. I know a lot of people who really take up drawing or painting, listening to calming music, walking outside in nature, mindfulness, meditation, working out, exercising, jogging or swimming, things like that. Um, these are just a few, and we know that. With meditation, there are many great resources on the web and apps for phones. Um, there are also more and more studies supporting the beneficial effects of mindfulness meditation practices in nurses and healthcare professionals. And we just kind of wanted to add that today. Okay, so I would like to hear from you. What other relaxation techniques do you find helpful that maybe I didn't ask or didn't have in there for suggestions. So as I continue to talk, go ahead and put that in the chat box. But what other relaxation techniques do you use? Um, Sometimes people talk to friends or someone they trust about how they are doing and feelings that they might be experiencing. And that's what I was kind of alluding to earlier is, you really need to make sure you are in touch with how you're feeling, but also being able to talk to a trusted person and sharing those feelings. Individuals need to know to allow others to assist with the caregiving. I know I had worked with an individual and she went to a self-care group where it was kind of her support group, and a person came in for that hour so she could be relieved to go be a part of that support group. I like what people are putting in that chat box. Gardening, definitely walks with their dog, um, and then cooking, prayer, spending time with kids, beautiful. Those are all fabulous ways to kind of deal with that stress. Educating yourself about the conditions of the care receiver and what can be expected can be very beneficial. Also, learning the skills needed to care for the care receiver. I love that part because sometimes, we're thrown into a situation and we don't really feel like we have the skill set to do the best job, but learning what is needed is important, and be aware and realistic of the ones they might not be able to do or be as helpful. So again, if there are things that you're limited to, know what that is and get that training. Studies show that staff that were sufficiently trained had more job satisfaction, motivated, and committed. They need to set realistic expectations for themselves and the care receiver. Take care of their physical needs, nutrition, exercise, sleep, and healthcare. That is so, so important that we continue to do that today, that we're really looking at our own needs of nutrition and exercise and sleep, and making sure we're, no matter what, no matter who we're caring for, that we're paying attention to our own self needs. And then again, as we look at prevent and manage caregiver stress with self-care, for formal caregivers participating in employee wellness programs, and that include health screenings, mentoring, and staff retreats, have been proven helpful in past studies. Interacting with other staff in structured support groups or debriefings, or having professional counselors available for support would also be helpful for professionals. Support groups would also be helpful. I kind of mentioned that a second ago, for informal caregivers as well, since talking with others that are in similar situation would not only be emotionally supportive, but also be educational. We all can learn from each other, and even part of sharing is it's great to hear other people's take on things. It is important to get time away from the care receiver. So utilizing any respite care available. I even heard talking to individuals who are caregiving for their children is that they needed mommy time. They needed to go for a walk or walk the dog just by themselves. That it doesn't mean that somebody is a bad mom or they're a terrible caregiver, but it's more being self-aware of having that break for a little bit. The burdens of caregiving can cause many difficult emotions that need to be acknowledged. Three emotions all caregivers often experience are anger, guilt, and fear. When these emotions are mismanaged, they can be destructive, may damage relationships with others, can harm personal well-being. Um, Again, as we take a look at that, I'm going to turn it right back over to Sherry to talk a little bit more about learning from your emotions.
Thanks, Tess. As she mentioned, the three very common emotions that caregivers will feel is anger, guilt, and fear. And the first one, anger, um, a lot of people have a hard time acknowledging that one because no one usually wants to say they're angry. Okay, they many times you'll hear them say that they're frustrated, or irritated, or maybe annoyed, but anger is not the word that usually comes out. But it's a natural feeling and emotion, and like Tessa said, we have to acknowledge. It's not a bad thing. It's just something that we have to acknowledge that we're having if we are. And so there are many reasons why caregivers will become angry, and it's okay to have that feeling. It's how they respond that makes the difference, whether it's positive or a negative feeling. Um, in fact, anger is often just a sign that something in your situation needs to be changed. So caregivers, they might become angry with themselves because they're not getting accomplished what they wanted, or things aren't going the way they wanted. They may get frustrated, as you so to speak, with maybe the care receiver, because of some of the burdens we mentioned, and challenges that we mentioned earlier. Um, they might also get angry with those who are either helping or should be helping. Um, those family members, or that they think that should be stepping in and doing something, that are not, or maybe they are, but they're not doing it the way they think they should. And the situation itself. Sometimes they're just angry because they have found themselves in this position that they never really planned on being in. And so most times they don't even know that they're angry until it is a problem. And learning to recognize the early warning signs of anger before it becomes full blown is helpful. And I think all of us kind of know, um, the signs. I can tell you right now that that I just told my son this morning. You know what? I'm feeling a little irritable today. So just be aware of that, and because I can tell I'm a little bit on edge, and a little short. So I think we all know our signs, and so when you feel that that anger coming on. Some methods used to deal with it constructively. Many of those methods are the same ones that you use when you deal with stress, that the list that Tessa kind of went over. Um, Definitely calming down is one, but the meditating and the exercising and talking with a friend about how you're feeling. Um, Maybe doing relaxation exercises like we mentioned, the deep breathing and progressive muscle relaxation or yoga. Um, all the things that you put in the chat box. All of those things could be things that you could also use to kind of help you deal with anger as well. And looking for ways to make a change is another additional one there. And if your anger becomes really overwhelming and you're not getting relief from those practices that we just mentioned, it might be a message that you might need to see someone professionally about it so that they can help you work through those feelings. Another common feeling is guilt. And let me get here. There we go. And many times guilt will follow anger. Often, or it can come without anger as well, but many times it will follow it because you're feeling guilty because of feeling angry or frustrated, or annoyed, because you're like, oh, I shouldn't feel this way, right? I should just be doing what I'm doing and not have this is terrible. I'm thinking this way. But like I said, they're natural emotions. You can't help them. You just have to acknowledge them and work with them. And so guilt in itself, it's usually felt when someone acts wrongfully or hurtfully toward another, or when they believe they have. So many times they may not have really done anything wrong or hurtful. It's just their perception that they did. So some of the reasons caregivers, additional reasons caregivers might feel guilt besides feeling angry, is that they might have unrealistic expectations of what they can do, and then they're unable to meet those expectations. Okay, so they feel like they should be handling all these things for the care receiver, and they're not quite accomplishing what they wanted to. It might be that they want to do more for the care receiver than they are doing, but they just can't do more. They want to, but they're prevented somehow, either from physical reasons or work-related reasons or what have you. Sometimes caregivers will regret decisions they have made or done, and this makes them feel very guilty. That regret over what they've already done. There may be those unresolved issues in the relationship that I mentioned earlier, or with the care receiver or with other family members that surface, and then they start feeling guilty over those. In some cultures, complete devotion to a care receiver is expected, and so feelings of guilt can arise from the caregiver when they don't feel that absolute devotion. You know, their culture says, you know, you must do this and you must be happy to do it, and they know they're not. So then they have this guilt on their minds. Okay, so how do you deal with it? Well, first of all, it's best to just step back and look at the situation. Is the guilt based on something real, or is it that something that's just perceived as being real? Okay, if the caregiver did do something that they wish they hadn't done, they shouldn't be afraid to admit it and apologize if needed, and then, you know, forgive themselves if they made a mistake, and forgive others if needed as well. I think a great opportunity here is to look at any mistakes made as a chance to learn and to change. So, you know, we're all human, and sometimes you're, like you said, we don't have that formal training. We're just learning as we go. And so it's only unfortunate if you don't learn from the mistake that you made. So if you can take that and use it as an opportunity to change some things, that's great. Expectations of the caregiver should be examined and adjusted to more realistic ones. What can the caregiver and the care receiver and other family members realistically do? Okay, sometimes we have in our heads what we think we want to do and what we want, you know, what we hope to, but then again, maybe we're not capable or able, and so you have to make sure that that it's very realistic and move to that. Caregivers should also focus on the helpful things that they've already done and recognize that they are doing their best. Okay, that hey, don't focus on the, you know, the things that you're not able to do, but hey, look at all these things that I am doing, what I have done, and I'm doing the best I can, and you know, and feel good about that. They can ask themselves if changes can be made to the situation and recognize what can be changed and what can't be changed. Okay, some things can and some things just won't be, and to be able to accept that. And then again, with all of these feelings, if they get to the point where they're, you know, just eating at you and you're not able to resolve them and feel better, then counseling is definitely something that anyone should pursue. Okay. And then the fear. And fear actually might be the underlying cause of the anger and guilt. And so you think, okay, so what fears would caregivers have? Well, you know, there's so many. And one of the big ones is just the unknown, you know, of, you know, what's going on, what's going to go on. And I have to say that, like, with our current situation right now, with the COVID-19 and the self-isolation, the social distancing, you know, if you're a caregiver, that's going to make just the whole situation that much harder anyway. And to not know what each day holds and what's going to happen, that builds a fear in all of us. But like I said, if you're caring for another person, whether they're an older adult or younger or a child or anything, that is going to intensify those fears. And if you're a long distance caregiver, maybe the person that you're caring for is in a long-term care facility, or they're halfway across the country, and that can intensify the fears as well, of that kind of the loss of control over what to do. So definitely don't discount the fears. So some other fears is that some caregivers say the more they become involved with care, the more and more they feel like they're left on their own, and they're not sure they can continue to provide that level of care without support. Another fear is that they're afraid that they will lose control with maybe that anger or the other feelings, and that they might say or do something they don't really want to do. That it just might happen with beyond their control. Some say they're afraid that a future event will occur where things will change and they will lose control. That's kind of like what I mentioned with the virus. Something we didn't plan on, definitely, and kind of throw that into it. Some fear that they might not be able to provide or to be able to continue providing care if they become ill themselves, or if the care needed becomes more than they can provide. You're doing the best you can, but you fear that, okay, if tomorrow, my health declines, or a week from now, or what have you, who's going to take care of them? What's going to happen? So there's that on that person's mind. One is, and this is an interesting one. Sometimes caregivers fear that their care receiver will pass away, because then some of them have so much invested in what they've done and where they've been, and what that, like I said, they have that identity now as just a caregiver, that if that care receiver passes away, they feel like they're abandoned and they don't know what they're going to do. That's all they've known to do for maybe for so long. So that's kind of in the back of some of their minds. And then another is just like very tangible thing, like financial concerns. Okay, can I afford the care that that person needs? If they have to have more skilled nursing care or go to a nursing facility, can we afford that? Okay, so that can often be one. And I see that there's some, I am very bad at trying to pay attention to two things at once. So, but I see the chat box, and I see that that there's some good comments there. And you say, oh, I hear you say you do not feel you are up to the task and fear you cannot do enough. Yes, yes.
I think it was in response to the person before, Sherry.
Oh, gotcha. See, I can't do two things at once.
Yeah, well, no, it's the person, was identifying, been feeling major guilt because they're ill themselves and they have a low immune system. And again, just I hear whenever you write that, in the fact of, sometimes people do feel like failure because they have limitations. But again, somebody else put in theirs, be kind to yourself. And I think it's really important that, again, because we have limitations doesn't mean we're bad or horrible, or we haven't done some really wonderful things. But taking care of ourselves sometimes is the best thing we can do.
Thank you, Tessa. Yeah, I see that now. And yeah, from Camille, yeah, that you have to focus on that last part of what you said there, is that, knowing your limits and focus on time for yourself, and, you're human, and, focusing on the good things that you're doing. So some steps for taking action about fear is first of all, identify what is that fear that you're having. If you know that you're having something, and name it and ask yourself, is this fear imagined? Is this a what if? Or is it a real fear? And why does it frighten? Why does it frighten that caregiver? And determine the specific things that contribute to that fear. Like, am I fearful of this because I don't know enough? Is there a lack of knowledge about this? Or is it because of the caregiver's health? Or is it because of personal commitments? Kind of, you might even write it out. And so that you can, work through that. And then examine what changes could be made. If it is a lack of knowledge, maybe your care receiver has a certain diagnosis, and knowing the most about that illness and what the progression would be and what to expect, if you could, if you could study up on that and know that, then maybe that would alleviate the fear, because you would know what to expect rather than not. Think about the things that could be done, right now. And again, there's going to be things that you can actively do something about, with that fear. And then there might be some that there might not be, you don't have control of. And so you have to just acknowledge it, and work with some of those methods we talked about. And even, like I said, a counselor is never a bad idea. Okay. So some additional tips. We have a couple more additional tips for caregivers. And one here is how caregivers view their role seems to influence their health and ultimately their ability to care. And so, because perception is so important, it's necessary for caregivers to understand and manage their emotions so they can focus on the positive. And so we got to look at our perceptions and if it's negative or positive. And one way to change your perception is to listen to what we call your self-talk, right? Is what you say to yourself. And if you're telling yourself, if your self-talk is negative, you might want to try to flip the script and try to turn those into positives. Now, that is not easy, because usually the negatives don't come overnight. They've developed and over time. And so it takes time to be able to change, your thought process there. But on the screen right now, there are some statements, okay, some brief little statements there. And they're negative, they're meant to be there. And so looking at those, thinking about how could you change those to actually be positive, okay? So for the first one, oh, she's just doing it on purpose, okay? Say you get frustrated with the care receiver, and you're just like, they're doing it on purpose. They don't need my help. You got to think of how could I turn that into a positive? And a way to do that might be to say, you know what? They're not doing it on purpose. It's just the disease. It's just the illness. They can't help it. Okay. If you're thinking no one cares, instead of thinking, no one cares about this, say, you know what? I know someone that cares, and I'm going to call my good listener. I'm going to call my friend that I know I can talk to. Okay. And so that's the same for the others. If they're, they were always stubborn and mean. Well, maybe we had some good times. We've had some good times. Okay. Sometimes it can be hard to flip it, trust me. But, trying to look at the positive side. So, I wish I were dead. I wouldn't be such a bother. And flipping that might be, you know what? There are people who care about me. And, I know where they are, and I'm going to talk to them. And even just kind of take deep breaths and, and try to practice that self-care. And the last one, if you would do this, things would be better. Well, instead of that, maybe, could you please help? And actually ask for help. It's hard. People have a hard time asking for help. Um, it just seems like it. And I never really understood that till I hurt my leg about a year ago, and I had to ask for help a few times because I had, it was kind of mobilized, and I couldn't always get around, and that was the hardest thing. I did not want to ask anybody, even though it was obvious I needed help. But yeah, oh, I see support groups. Awesome. Yes. Yeah, because most of those people in support groups, I just read in the chat box there, they've been there, done that, or they're doing it. So what better person to talk with, you know? And I think especially ones that have went through the caregiving journey and have finished, are great ones to talk to, because they can reflect back on that as well. So another thing for caregivers to look at is communication, and Tessa's going to talk about that.
Yeah, and I think it's very fitting for what people are putting in the chat box. So we all know the value of good communication, and it definitely is important for self-care and when emotions are running high. A key to keeping calm is to begin gently. And I love that because I don't know about you, sometimes when people say things that are offensive or whatever else, it's hard to keep calm at times. But I love when it says keeping calm is to begin gently. So when speaking, know what you want to say and be specific. Stay on the topic. So that's really important to do. Sometimes people don't like when others ramble, but really be specific and stay on the topic. Speak tactfully without blaming. And that is really important as well because sometimes whenever you say you, that puts people on the defense. So make sure that you're not blaming somebody else. When listening, do not interrupt. So you're active listening, you're really paying attention to what is being said. Let each person have their say. Listen with empathy or as if you are in their shoes. And that's important piece as well is that sometimes we need to look from a different lens or a different angle, put on a different, sunglasses and see it differently. Accept what is being said, even if you don't agree. So acceptance doesn't mean you're agreeing with them, but it's about understanding where they're coming from and try to receive criticism with an open mind or as an opportunity to improve. So don't look at it as, oh, they're just being so critical of me. Just taking it in and listening to it and looking at a way to improve. And then again, as we continue on with communication is key, um, double check to make sure you understand what the others mean. Sometimes we hear it and we just run with what we think we understand, but sometimes getting that clarifying, making sure you're asking those clarifying questions so you clearly understand what the others mean. Sometimes we'll say, oh, I know what they mean, but sometimes we go on the defense instead of making sure we do actually understand. Pay attention to the nonverbal messages like tone of voice and body language. Get all the facts. And even when we're communicating, we need to pay attention to our own tone of voice and body language because sometimes somebody's like, why are you so angry? And I'm like, I'm not angry. And so, again, really paying attention to that. Check to see if you understand them. Am I hearing you say, again, as we look at that active communication. And just remember, only you can change your communication patterns. You're not here to change or control somebody else, but you do have control and you can change your communication patterns. And so, again, as we look at finding help, um, again, there are different types of help and services that informal caregivers might want to engage. Here are some things to consider as caregivers choose what type of assistance is best for their situation. So again, consider the care receivers and family circumstances and their wishes, making sure that you have it that you clearly are understanding what the wishes are. Also allow care receivers to be as independent as possible. Sometimes we might be in a hurry or whatever else. But again, we need to make sure we take that deep breath and we're present, and we think about our patients with it, because individuals want to be as independent as they can be. Have realistic goals and plans, and I know I put that in the chat box earlier, but making sure that we have realistic goals and plans for those we're caring for, but also for ourselves, and learn about financial and legal aspects, and rely on formal and informal support systems. Again, I kind of refer to know your support system, and don't, write that list out as people who you can call, and it might be just for a half an hour or whatever else, but have those numbers handy that, maybe you don't call upon them very often, but you do have somebody to call upon. And again, keep in mind, use respite care. I attend a lot of interagency meetings, and there's many different organizations that are willing to help out with respite care as well. So then again, the CDC, I just wanted to kind of share about some of the advice that they have there. These suggestions are especially important when there is a dangerous situation like the natural disaster, or if the care receiver is considered vulnerable and is quarantined. Here are some additional tips for caregivers to keep in mind as they provide care for others. So again, according to the Centers of Disease Control, monitoring needed medical supplies related to loved one's condition or treatments. So as we're thinking about that, about oxygen, wounded care, just overall, you think about all the different types of common supplies, such as tissues and cough syrup and so on, but really monitor the needed medical supplies, and that sometimes we need to get those extra supplies and have them on hand. Purchase enough non-perishable food items so you are prepared to stay home for some time. Contacting healthcare providers to obtain extra necessary medications. I'm not saying that you should, completely stock up, but the CDC does say talk about stocking up on over-the-counter medications. So if you are quarantined to stay home or whatever, that you need to make sure that you have enough medications there at home. Those who with a loved one in a care facility should monitor the situation. Again, if you're away and you can't go in, ask about health of the residents frequently, and know the protocol. If there is anything, an outbreak like we have now, know the overall protocol, but again, we develop really good relationships. So if we're from afar, making sure you can call somebody to do kind of check-ins with them as well. Revisit emergency plans and touch base with family and friends that help with certain activities like grocery shopping and transportation. If care receivers are considered vulnerable and are quarantined, caregivers need to use appropriate precautions when out in the community and then returning to the care receiver. A population identified as vulnerable should try to stay home as much as possible. And if someone brings food and supplies, have them leave it at the door. I mean, we've been hearing those messages ongoing, but again, the online orders can be made and delivered to the door as well. Cancel any non-essential medical appointments. I think that's happening now automatically. But I know even I had a phone call and I could be seen soon. And the fact is, just if it's non-essential, just don't go. Practice proper hygiene like hand washing and disinfecting surfaces regularly. Keep germs away by wiping down door handles, steering wheels, cell phones, remotes, remote controls. I say that again just because when we think about all the things that we're touching and things that we need to clean, we just need to kind of think about, the steering wheel. Sometimes people don't always think about that. Spend quality time with the care receiver and your family. Be present with the people and things you do enjoy. And so, again, I just kind of end with that. But the fact is, spend quality time a lot of times we're around individuals, and sometimes we just need to look at the quality of the time that we have together, and sometimes that can help with some of the guilt that we might be feeling. So Sherry, I'm turning back over to opportunities.
Sorry, I was talking and I had muted myself. There we go. So as I was saying, I know it's after 3, and I think we're losing some people. So I want to make sure and get these opportunities in, and I can't seem to like back up my slide. So I'm just going to keep it on here. The amazing opportunities of caregiving. I mentioned at the beginning that we tend to think of the burdens, the challenges first, but the opportunities are huge. And I wanted to save those for the last part of this because I'm going to end on a high note, okay? And so some of the opportunities that we say come up from caregiving is that caregivers and receivers, because they're spending more time together, they have time to reminisce and talk about life and to grow closer with each other. And if you already had a great relationship, then this is an opportunity to continue that and enjoy it. If you didn't have such a great relationship in the past, maybe this is the chance that allows you both to make amends and to grow closer with each other. So this could be a great opportunity for that. Another opportunity is quality care. So even those people who care out of a sense of duty, they're pleased that they can look after their family members. And so there's a sense of purpose in personally giving care and giving that care receiver the best possible care and knowing they're getting that best possible care. So caregivers can feel a sense of achievement because of this, or increased self-worth because they feel like they're fulfilling their responsibilities, and that makes them feel better about themselves. And it should. It should. They don't expect a pat on the back, but they will feel that self-worth, which is awesome. And another opportunity is caregiving can be viewed as an opportunity to repay the care receiver for mutual caring in the past. So if this is your parent that you're providing care for, then it's like you feel like you're paying them back for raising you and providing all that care when you were a child. So, people will feel that way as well. And if you look at the quotes on the screen, that kind of reflects that. These are quotes from real caregivers that we had talked to. And you'll see that reflected in there. We often spend more time together, reminisce and talk about the meaning of life, and we've grown closer. So, and they're satisfied that they could look after their care receiver. They feel a sense of purpose, and it makes them feel good about themselves. And it's a way to repay them back. So these are definitely, this is definitely the upside of the caregiving experience. And again, when talking with caregivers throughout Illinois, we heard them say that there are opportunities in good times and there are burdens brought on by uncomfortable feelings, but they all said that they would do it again, regardless of the situation, that they were happy to be able to do that for them. And so there's a list of caregiver resources, but don't worry about taking a picture of the screen or any of that stuff. We'll be sending you a follow-up email, and it will have a link to 2 handouts. And one of them has all of these resources on this page on there, okay? So, and you might already be familiar with them, but one that I'll point out is right in the middle, the U of I Extension Caregiving Resources page. We ourselves have our own page that has several brochures that deal with lots of these things we talked about today. and they're actually not brochures, they're tip sheets. So they're in PDF form, so they're really easy to open up, and you can print it off if you want, or just view it on the screen. So there's some great resources there, as well as on the other links too. Don't forget, now next week, if you're following along with all of these webinars each week, next week on the 9th, we're going to tackle clutter, or clearing our clutter. And so I hope that you can tune in for that one as well. It will be a very good, it's always a well-received topic. And then there is a link here that we would love for you to go to and do an evaluation for us about today's webinar. That should also be in the follow-up email that you are getting, but it's a pretty short link that you can write down here or copy and paste, and just give us your opinion of what you heard today and what we could do to improve, or if it was sufficient, or how you felt. We're always learning as well, and situations are always changing too. So I'd love to hear from you for that. And then we also have a few more resources, but I believe that'll be in your email that you'll get. There are some resources that U of I and Extension has developed more in response for the COVID-19. There's a link there. And there is a link for our healthy family living resources. And then those are the two links that will take you to the handouts, and you should receive that. No problem. So I hope that you, you know, I always feel like these webinars are two-pronged. It's like they're educational, but also inspirational as well. I hope that you have some good positive things to take away from today. So is there anything else? If you want to type in the chat box if there's anything, any questions you might have, or I see that we're losing people probably because it's past the hour. I apologize for that. So I thank all of you for joining us, and I wish we were able to take comments from everybody in here, and that's why if you can do your evaluation and do comments, that would be awesome to hear from you. And just stay healthy through this time, you and your families, and take care of yourselves. Don't forget that self-care, please. Tessa, do you have anything to add?
No, I mean, and I appreciate all the comments, and I like what somebody else said. You know, sometimes we need to be very specific, and if we ask somebody for help, make sure we tell them what we want and when and where and everything else, and make that, you know, if they're available to do it, great. If they're not, they're not. So thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully we'll see some of you, or see you on the chat box next week.